Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Ladan Jiracek.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Ranu Jung of Florida International University. She's the professor and chair of the Department of Biomedical Engineering there, and we talked about her project for the FDA project for a neural-enabled prosthetic hand. So basically, this is a prosthetic that an amputee might wear in order to be able to have sensory feedback coming from whatever the person is gripping. So in this way, the person can grip an egg, a grape, and actually in this episode, I did this amazing joke where I said that actually those are nice things to be able to grip an egg and to be able to grip a grape, for example. But really the important thing is to be able to grip somebody's hand during a handshake. And this is probably the most important thing, because if you break somebody's hand while you're meeting them, that's probably not going to go well. So I think I'm going to cut that part out because it was just so funny. So I'm going to let you guys laugh right now. Okay, so anyways, I found this very interesting. We also talked in the end about her other projects with kind of this bioelectric medicine of the medicine of the future. So instead of having pharmaceuticals and drugs or pills that circulate through the whole body, you would have neural stimulation go directly to the organ in question. And she's going to be on the editorial board of the new journal to be launched called Bioelectronics in Medicine. And anyway, so this is kind of a future. She has a project with this as well. I found this personally very interesting. And as I'm learning more and more, I'm learning with you guys actually. I'm learning more and more along this search of where and what to look into and what's interesting in the field of neuroprosthetics and brain-machine interfaces. I'm kind of starting to think this bioelectronics, bioelectronic medicine is got a pretty cool future, and it could be even a better future than what I had envisioned of basically Matrix style learning of Kung Fu. And I think we can all agree it's probably much sooner down the line. So take a listen, and we'll talk more on the other side.
We have approval from the FDA for this investigational device for an early feasibility study. So the study with this whole system is yet to be conducted. So they are not already implanted in people. The whole system has not yet been implanted in people. The way it works is we are not using the Utah electrode arrays. We are using longitudinal intrafascicular electrodes. So there's a few different kinds of electrode arrays people have. There's the Utah array, which goes across and has multiple pinpoints, so to speak. There is something called transverse, the time electrode that goes across the nerve. What we are using is longitudinal intrafascicular electrodes. So these are like fine human hair thickness wires, and they go along the length of the fascicle. So you expose a few fascicles, and you effectively thread the electrode into the fascicle, so it lies in parallel with the nerve fibers, not across them.
Okay, so what's the advantage of this? Is this like on a bigger scale, like instead of tens of microns is maybe, hundreds of microns?
Yeah, so there's few different advantages that are there. So one is that, remember, since you are going in parallel, so when you will have when the nerve stretches, right, so you're not going across, there's no metal across or no electrode going across the nerve fibers. It's lying in parallel with them. Second is we expose a much larger area along the length of the fiber, so we are able to do charge delivery that we can do a much larger charge delivery. At the same time, we are able to capture a targeted area that is just around the electrode itself. So all of those give us advantages for being able to both mechanically there is advantages, and also the amount of charge delivery we can do.
So does that mean that it's easier surgery? It's maybe less less of a chance of being rejected by the body as well? And what does it mean, especially when you can have higher charges?
So surgery, one could argue easier or not easier. I don't think we could say one way or the other. The one thing that we have seen, with, at least with all our histology and effort, is that we don't have trauma there, and that was part of the whole effort with going into the to the FDA with all of the histology effort before. And previously, when these longitudinal intravesicular electrodes were implanted in cats by Ken Horch, who was at Utah, and he's part of our team now, they were in for 6 months in active moving around cats and recording from them. So you don't have the trauma of going many electrodes going across the nerve fibers. You don't have any of that. It's easier to anchor them individually. Now, on the other hand, you can argue that you have to put many more. Will be putting more of these, sewing them through, so the surgery could be a little more. It's not like a one shot, boom, we put it in and that's it. So it's a little more delicate in the implantation process. So and with the time, the way we understand it, it is actually going across you have to weave it through the nerve fascicles across the, at least that's what at the last poster that we saw at SFN, they were explaining that in order to be intravesicular, they had to kind of weave it across multiple fascicles in a, so you're going not in parallel, but in orthogonal to the nerve fibers.
And you mentioned that, of course, glial scarring is a huge problem in these neural implants, and that your, your colleague was able to have this for 6 months in cats. Is the longevity of these better than the alternatives?
As far as we know, that has given that is the longest with the recordings. And the other thing is that with human subjects, they have been done for a shorter time period and only with individual lives, and that have been removed. And they have been able to, they've been able to do the stimulation and also recording with them.
Interesting. And how far along are you in this project? So
in this project, we are the only people who have approval from the FDA to do a investigational, do this early feasibility study. So we are at the point where we have a complete system which is fully implanted, and you wirelessly communicate with it. So no wires coming across the skin. We have got the approval from the FDA to do this study. We have the IRB approvals to do the studies, and we are right now in the process of we are recruiting subjects for it. So we are in conversation with subjects, or when I say subjects, I mean volunteers, amputee upper extremity amputee volunteers. So we are in that is the stage we are at.
And so if you had to guess a timeline, I know this is like a risky thing sometimes to be going out on a limb like this, but when do you think you'd have the results, like the final results of it?
All recruitment and everything goes well. It's a 2-year study, so so sometime this fall we should have an implant done in the first subject or first volunteer, and then later, we will first start with 2 people, and then we can go up to 6 people in this initial feasibility study. So my hope is that sometime by the end of the year we should start having data coming out.
What are the goals of this research as well?
So we've got basically we have got 3 goals that are there. And some of them have to do with figuring out for the device, and the other is figuring out about the functional effectiveness of the device. So we will obviously study what happens when you put when you have the system in. How does this impact the person's ability to perhaps improve their function in motor control when you have got sensation available. So we would study whether or not with and without sensory feedback, how does the person perform in their activities of motor performance. The other thing we would be looking for is the safety and efficacy of the system itself. The way the system will ultimately, after about 6 months or so, they'll be able to take it home. So then, of course, what we are looking to see is that having this kind of sensory feedback, does that enhance, or do they use their prosthetic hand more, or do they use it also for more bimanual tasks? That they do more of the bimanual tasks.
Exactly. As we were joking before we started recording, was how many people do they send to the ER by doing handshakes, and hopefully by doing less, they'll enjoy the prosthetic more. Because that's a big problem actually in prosthetics, is that they're only used like half the time or something like this, just because it's kind of ungainly and you don't get any feedback from it. And so maybe if it was actually like part of your body, then they would actually use it more as well, right?
Yeah, so there's this whole issue of motor control, and there's this issue of embodiment. Does the person think of it as a really part of their body itself? And so there is more and more data or literature suggesting that if you had sensory feedback, that there would be a greater likelihood that the person would embody that prosthetic limb as and perceive that as part of their body or extension of their body itself. And so I think it is it's that aspect, and also then functionally, are you going to use it more if you actually get sensation back? And whether it is conscious or unconsciously, or you when, as you said, squeezing somebody's, shaking somebody's hand. Right now, you would have to look at how much has my prosthetic hand moved, that I don't end up, crushing somebody's hand. So how does that play into people's psyche of, unconsciously not shaking people's hands because they are kind of concerned that, hey, I might squish that other person's hand too much. So, those things like that if that was not a concern, would you be much more interactive with people? So that would be very difficult to quantify, but that all comes into the whole quality of life that we have, where, touch plays such an important role in our everyday life.
Exactly. So how did you get into this field actually? How did you get into this project as well?
Project is back in 2005, 2006, and I'd been working a lot more in the motor control for movement, for locomotion, and aspects of motor control for that, and had been looking at biohybrid systems, where I say interfaces of devices with people, and with a colleague Jimmy Abbas, who's at Arizona State University. And at that time, DARPA had a call for one of their meetings that they invite some people. It's actually a public meeting, but they invite people to come in and look at challenges that they are looking to address. And so when I was at it, what they said, this is around the time of the the initial Iraq War, and they said, hey, we need a smart prosthesis for upper limb amputees. And so even this whole interest was there already with interfaces between devices and people, and had been working primarily with spinal cord injury and that aspect. And then this opportunity was presented. And I felt, okay, I talked to Jimmy, and we said, yep, this is a challenge we would be up for. And so we took it on. That's how it's kind of, to some extent, serendipitously started this particular project.
Exactly. And hopefully this defense research will kind of spill over into the normal world, and not only war veterans will be able to have these prosthetics, but normal people as well. That's really cool.
Yeah, so what happened at that time was that we ended up putting a proposal to the National Institutes of Health, and so the technology development got done under funding from the National Institutes of Health through a mechanism they call the Bioengineering Research Partnership. So you partner with industry, clinical folks, and academics. So it's an academic clinical industrial partnership, and the technology was developed under that with NIBIB and NICHD funding the whole effort. And now we have done full circle, and now actually DARPA is funding the study for the human implant study, the feasibility study. But it's not for just war veterans. It is actually open to any amputee, and we have been approached by, we are being contacted now as the word has gotten around. We are being contacted by different amputees, and they're not necessarily war veterans.
So is there a certain type of amputee that you guys can only do? Or, I mean, it's like a mid-arm amputee or something like this? Or what exactly? Or could you do leg ones eventually too?
Yes, so right now the initial study is for people with a transradial, so that's somewhere between the elbow and the wrist. There are several wrist disarticulates who are very interested. It would mean a little bit of a different way in which we put the electronics, but initially the start is with between the elbow and the wrist and a unilateral, so that we are going up to give this opportunity. We would work with people whose one arm is completely intact. But there's nothing which says that afterwards this couldn't be expanded to other amputee needs, including those with leg amputations.
And what do you think? What do you foresee the biggest challenges to be in this field and with this project?
Well, there are. I think of challenges as opportunities, and I think that there is a debate about how many interfaces do you need? So there's a camp which says, oh, you need hundreds of stimulation points. But on the other hand, if you look at like the cochlear implant device, you've got very few, at most you have got 22 electrodes in, but they don't even have 22 of them on all the time. And they with the algorithms, etc., for the stimulation paradigms and the plasticity of the brain in response to this neurostimulation, people are able to interpret even music and enjoy music. So those are the open questions of how many points do you need to stimulate? What kind of paradigms it would have to be, and how does the brain respond, and what kind of neuroplasticity might we evoke over time that would allow for a richer sensory experience and multiple senses at the same time. Like, when we open our hand and close our hand, it's everything from touch to hand opening and closing to multiple fingers and grips, grip being formed. It's all just, we don't even think about it. All of that is happening, right? So that the opportunity and the challenge is going to be with a limited interface between our devices and the nonlinear, dynamically changing nervous system and body. How do we get the richest possible experience or perception space to the person who's using this prosthetic device?
So it sounds, if I had to guess, it sounds like you're more of the camp of fewer, or like maybe a dozen or so, or a few dozen electrodes is better than hundreds or thousands, and that the body will adapt. Is this kind of the way that you're leading?
That is what we are banking on. That the human brain is very good at filling in the gaps, so to speak. And that we will be able to fill in the gaps, that the person will be able to fill in the gaps of the different pieces of information that are being communicated. But it is, at the end of it is still an open question. One other challenge that we have is that, most of our technology pieces, they're not adaptive. We may put in some adaptive algorithms, but we have a long way to go to making truly adaptive biomimetic adaptive hardware, so that as we progress further, that would be an area to look into.
That's actually a very interesting point. I haven't really heard many people talk about this. What would be an example of that, or how would you envision this?
So if we think about let's just think about the stimulation paradigms itself, right? So you could think in terms of adaptive in the time scale of within a task, and adaptive over days or over months or years. So if you are just doing within a task, you may say, okay, this thing is a little bit heavier, and so I change my stimulation paradigm to respond with a higher frequency or higher amplitude or some combination, and that is in response to the system of something that you are picking up. But at the same time, you know that the neural system might be adapting and responding less. It's like, if you keep your thumb pressed across on an object, then initially you feel it more, and then afterwards you don't really quite feel it. So as that happens, how do you change the stimulation paradigm automatically for that short time period? But then on the other hand, if you think in terms of, if I come back 6 months later and I've been doing this stimulation and my brain now has become much more responsive to these channels of stimulation, and just a little bit of stimulation and I know, there is an input coming in. How do you automatically then alter or adapt that stimulation paradigm so that there's no engineer coming in and saying, okay, now I'm going to change this or change that, So that kind of adaptive system or plastic, in this case, I'm talking about an algorithmic system that can function both at small time scales or short time scales and long time scales. So how do we put in those smarts into our systems? That's something that would be interesting.
Kind of an algorithm that learns as you do. Could you see this with the actual physical device as well? I mean, maybe like the design or some clever engineering design or something like this?
So I don't know if we end up with some kind of, this is really going out on a limb and saying, are there some kind of stretchable materials and shape memory materials? And, we're talking about those kinds of things. Would they somehow respond differently to things that are going on within the body? And then if we someday have organic material mixed with non-organic material in our interfaces, perhaps those would be the future.
Yeah, my I guess pet project, or the thing I'm really interested in, is like gels and maybe gel-based implants. And I see a future in this. I don't know if that's true, but so if you had a magic wand, what would you change in your field?
What would I change? I think what I would change if I had a magic wand was the ability to pull together multiple ideas and thoughts and implement them in a shorter time scale. It's like sometimes you have ideas and thoughts that are too early because there is a key aspect of innovation that hasn't occurred. And you say, if only this had occurred now. So that's, if I could better sync the different innovations to get us a particular outcome, that would be my magic wand, I guess, is to be able to, which I don't think is ever going to happen, stretch and squeeze time on innovations.
Well, that's actually a little bit of the point of this podcast, is to bring together the innovations. So you don't have to wait for a conference. You can, as you're on the bus or in the train or even, in the lab, you can be learning about this passively and maybe get an idea from somebody else, maybe before they've published or just as it's published. And I think so that's actually one of the goals of this. And I guess like one longer term goal, and I haven't started on this, would be like some sort of wiki would be really interesting, like where it's like people stake, like, okay, I have this or I'm doing this and these are my results. It's not published. It's a multi-month long process to publish, and then by the time somebody reads it, it could be a year or 2 years, something like this. But in this way, other people could have access to the information like a year or a few years earlier, something like this, which is huge in this field, which is moving at light speed pretty much.
Yes, I think we have to have a collective thought process and shared ideas. The growth is immense. The possibilities of changing our future with impacting of this, this merging of the living and non-living, it's already happened, but it's now exponentially growing. And so the more we are able to exchange ideas and think of a future that perhaps is not conceivable today, I think that's the exciting part.
It's a wisdom of the crowds kind of thing, and you just need lots of people and big fluidity of ideas kind of to make it happen.
Yes.
Do you have any recommendations on who we should talk to or what we should read?
Different people. I would recommend my own colleague Jimmy Abbas. You can talk to him about his spinal cord injury work. You could talk to him about that. I don't know if you've talked to Warren Grill. Those would be two names. I could Warren Grill at Duke, and I can recommend him. I could also recommend Winnie Jensen in Aalborg University. She has done also some of these different kinds of interface things, and so those are three names that I can recommend to you. What I think, did you do Walter White?
Yeah, he was the first guest on the show, and he was very nice. He was very generous with his time.
Yes, so that would be his name comes to my mind. That would be another person. Vanessa, who's just joined Neuralink, so she would be another person to talk to.
Yeah, Vanessa Tolosa.
So I've given you James Abbas at ASU, Warren Grill at Duke, Winnie Jensen at Aalborg, and Vanessa at Elon Musk's new company.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been really good. Is there anything that you want to talk about or that you want to mention? Maybe your contact information or anything else?
Yes, you can. People can email me. That's, of course, the easiest. It's rjung@fiu.edu. That's perhaps the easiest way to do it, to contact me. Besides this project, we are also looking at a diaphragmatic pacing to restore function to perhaps people with impaired ventilatory systems, or phrenic or diaphragmatic pacing, and there is some adaptive control and biohybrid system development that we are working on that. So if people want to know more about it, they can email me about that too. And otherwise, keep tuned.
That sounded pretty interesting. Could you explain that other project a little bit more? It's kind of like a, I guess, iron lung or a ventilator, but without the ventilator, right?
Yeah, so it's basically to replace mechanical ventilators. So right now there is commercially available stimulation for the phrenic nerve to either people who are mechanical ventilator dependent, or some of them who are partially spinal cord injured or incomplete injury, or the central hypoventilation, or there is diaphragmatic pacing where there's a company Synapse that does that, and another one Avery that for the phrenic pacing. All of these are open loop controllers. So this is what I mean by they have electrodes placed, but they have like a fixed pattern of stimulation, and that's what happens. So what we had been working on adaptive control stuff for, and this is something that Jimmy had been doing, that James Abbas for spinal cord injury, for movement control, for limb movement, and borrowing on that idea, we actually now are working on a closed loop adaptive control of the diaphragm. So we are able to, so right now we have gone through the animal studies, and we are able to adaptively say, hey, this is the volume, breath to breath to breath that we want the person to have, and it automatically will adjust the stimulation levels so that you get the right amount of volume. And we are also working on how do you change the frequency and the amplitude of stimulation so that you can get the right volume of breath and right rate of breathing, so that you can maintain some of your metabolic measures remain okay. So, for example, the amount of CO2 that in your arterial blood, so it's called, and that you can measure with as you breathe out, you can measure that. And so to make sure that remains in the normal levels by giving you ability to breathe with the right volume and at the right rate of breathing. So that's the project that's another exciting project that we are looking at. Again, it's a hybrid of device in the body, and then and in an adaptive control system approach. And so that's where I mean, short time scales to stimulate per breath, and long time scales as you respond to metabolic needs of the person over days or over time or just hours.
This is really interesting, and this is actually what the person who recommended you, Dr. Manfred Frank, a former guest, who you might know from Case Western, he was talking about this, that I should talk to you about this topic actually, and I'm curious because I've heard many of the previous guests who've talked about this as well, and it sounds fascinating, and actually from my point of view, it seems like the need is maybe bigger and that the market is maybe bigger for these kinds of things rather than the amputee stuff. What's your opinion on this?
Clearly, the amputee market is much smaller. The ventilation market is bigger. Even the ventilation market is not as big as some of the other autonomic disease markets like diabetes or something like things like that. The amputee market is is much more of a quality of life. A transradial amputee who's a unilateral transradial amputee, they have certain loss of function, but on the other hand, it's not life-threatening. Whereas if you are on a ventilator, and there is a very, very large number of people who get onto ventilators, there's a huge, that's a huge, to being able to wean you off of a ventilator and give you not only get quality of life, but that's also something. It's a completely different level of intervention there, so to speak. So yes, there is. We are excited about that project also very much.
Wait, so are you saying that for the prosthetics, it's not such a great need as for the ventilator one?
It's a different kind of need. So somebody who has one arm can do certain things, but somebody who's on a ventilator may not be able to do many more things. Yeah. So they're different kinds of things. To me, the technology we have developed for the upper limb amputee, the biggest platform that is that it is a system to do targeted stimulation inside nerves. That means that down the road, you can be thinking about targeted stimulation. It's both targeted and graded stimulation inside nerves, or we could do recording from inside nerves. So that means that can be applied to, down the road, you could apply it to many different conditions in which you want targeted and graded stimulation of nerve fibers, whether they are in the leg or they are going to you've heard all the talk about bioelectronic medicine, so to speak, or whether they are nerves going to different end organs in the body. And so our amputee project, this is the first time FDA has given approval to do an investigational study where you are targeting the inside of fascicles. That, to me, that is huge. So to do this early feasibility study of what it means to be inside the fascicles and do this with a fully implanted wireless system. So there's application-wise, I think there are many other opportunities that can come about after that.
So you would learn more from this project, which you can then apply to quote unquote easier projects, these bioelectronic projects, right?
Yes. So you would learn about how So with this process, with the amputee project, we will have learned about the safety, efficacy, and how do you target different populations within the nerves, multiple different kinds of populations. And so once you have learned that, then that opens up the opportunity to go and apply the same or similar technologies to other nerves. And then that really opens up a huge opportunity.
Okay, and then for this ventilator project, is that something DARPA is interested in as well, or has DARPA funded this kind of stuff?
For the stimulation of the ventilatory one?
Yeah, and bioelectronics generally, I guess, as well.
Yes, DARPA is funding so-called bioelectronics kinds of work for different projects where they have tried to say, we're going to stimulate certain nerves to enhance neuroplasticity in the brain. So they have done a few different kinds of funding there. Companies have done for the autonomic nervous system. GlaxoSmithKline has put in a bunch of money for it, and they have a large amount of money for it. NIH has a whole program for stimulating peripheral nerves, the SPARK program. So there is funding that is available in different formats. A lot of it has been right now, early on, has been to understand by recording nerves and stimulating nerves to basically get the basic science done, and not so much yet completely at the for human deployment completely. But there is also a group in New York that they have been doing it for the immune system. So stimulation for the immune system. So there is considerable interest. We are going to be launching a new journal called Bioelectronics Medicine from I'm on the editorial board. Rob Shepard's the editor-in-chief. Later this fall.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
So this will be a new journal where people will be able to publish their results?
Yes. The latest information can be put in there.
Yeah, this is, I've been doing this project or this podcast and kind of been going through this process. And I was really interested in like brain implants and like learning through brain implants, like, the matrix or something like this. But now as I'm thinking more and more about this, I'm thinking this bioelectronics might be able to open the doors to that later on. And also, I mean, it would have lots of money and lots of funding and everything like this. And hopefully kind of upset the pharmaceutical industry, which I'm not that big of a fan of. But so actually this has been more and more attractive to me recently.
It's a targeted, when we stimulate the nerves, we are doing neuromodulation with a very targeted approach.
Exactly. So what locations? I mean, you've mentioned a few places, but for me, as somebody who wants to do a PhD and is looking for like the perfect PhD, what would you recommend for this bioelectronics?
There's different groups around the country, and depends on what you want to do. There's stuff going on at UT Dallas. There's stuff going on at Georgia Tech. There's stuff going on at Case. We would be happy to have you. There's many places that there is activity going on, and of different kinds.
I'm actually outside of the U.S. right now, and hopefully, I don't know. I was recommended that not to do the PhD in the U.S. but to do it abroad. But yeah, that's very good advice.
In Australia, you can check. There's Italy, but you can also check Rob Shepard's group in Australia.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ranu Jung. This was very good. I found this very, very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty good interview. I thought it was pretty cookie cutter until the end, and I think at the end, for me anyways, it got really interesting. Up until then, we kind of just did a brief overview of her work, but for me at the end, I guess when we talked about the project that they're not trying to promote right now, is when it got really interesting for me. As I said in the introduction, this bioelectronic medicine for me is getting more and more interesting, and I'm starting to think like, maybe this is actually what has the biggest future. And then the lessons, as we talked about in the interview, the lessons learned from this can later be applied to something else. And in this way, you can utilize the funding, you can utilize, the inertia, the momentum behind bioelectronic medicine and be able to do something else with it. So be able to go further along with it. So I've really enjoyed this. Hopefully you liked it as well. I'm very curious what you guys are thinking, actually, what you guys think of the show and everything like this. So I'm very curious to hear from you. And yeah, anyways, I would love to hear from you the same way I've heard from Karine Musa. And Karine was kind enough to write me a email saying that she loved the show and she would like to know what the experts feel is the best program or plan of action for engineers who are interested in working within this field. So if you have an answer for Karine, then please let me know and I will forward it to her and I will tell you, because actually this is something that I'm interested in as well. As you know, listening to the show, I am on the search for the next step in neural implants as well. And I don't want to just go for a good fit. I don't want to just go for any company or any project. It needs to be the best project. It needs to be the perfect project. So anyways, guys, let me know if you have an answer for me and you have an answer for Karine. Please write to me, Neural Implant Podcast, all one word, neuralimplantpodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, let's start this conversation and we'll hear each other next week.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.